a web application using ASP.NET MVC5 Entity Framework DB first and jQuery, SQL Server, Bootstrap. So these are the technologies that we are going to use to implement a web application. So we are going to use the ASP.NET MVC5 Entity Framework DB first and jQuery and SQL Server and Bootstrap for UI. Now, to implement this application, the first step is, so step 1, we should have use cases, class diagrams, to understand what we want to implement and what data we want to capture and what will the activities performed by the actor inside the system. So right now we'll not have time to go for this. So here what I'm going to tell you, so we are going to implement one web app for a single store. So for single online store to sell products. So we are going to develop a web app for a single online store to sell the products. So here we are going to develop a web app for a single online store to sell the products. So this application will have two actors, we can say. So the first is store, online store, and another is the user want to buy the products from the store. So these are the two actors that we have. One is online store, another is user. Now let's list out the operations that this online store will do. So we assume that the store will have an admin and we provide a login to the admin using which store can add, or we can say manage products, orders and users. So in detail, when I say in detail, if you look at in details, we'll have this activities. So store admin will perform following activities. Store admin will perform the following activities. So it will manage product main category, it will manage product category, then manage products, and then in next step it will view the orders, dispatch orders, and we'll say view payments. Beside this, store admin will do some common activities like login, logout, change password, edit profile. No registration. So here we are assuming that there will be only one store. So we do not need registration of a store. So when you want to develop application for multiple stores, in that case we can have the store registration. Now to keep the scope limited, so we are assuming here, so one store. So whatever we are doing for the one store, you can also do it for the multiple stores. So you can also do it for the multiple stores. Now let's try to understand what user can do. So user will perform following activities in application. So the first user will have the common activities like registration, login, logout, change password, edit profile. Now beside this, user will search products, it will manage cart, so it will manage the cart to there. So it will add the product in the cart, it will remove the product from the cart, it will manage the cart of the. Now, so it will also place orders and it will view orders. So user will have these activities: registration, login, logout, change password, edit profile, search products, manage cart, place orders, view orders. Okay. So these are the, we can say, raw set of activities that is supposed to be performed by the user and a store. So user and the store. Now in the next steps, what we do, it will create a database. So we'll create a database. We are going to use the first approach. So I'll create database in SQL Server. Now to create database, we need a class diagram. Then you can capture the raw data from the class diagram. Then you can apply a normalization process, and through normalization, so you will get the tables, and then you can use that tables to store the data. So use those tables to store the data. Now here I did this application several times. So I'm going to create tables directly. So I'm going to create the tables directly. So which tables I'm going to create? So the first step, I'll create a main category. Now I'll create a subcategory or category, we can say. I'll just say category. So main category, subcategory. So I want to create a dynamic menu. Now to create a dynamic menu, we'll have the main category, for example, electronics, and in that suppose we have a subcategory or category like computer, and in that we will have products. So to store the electronics, I am going to create a main category. To store the category computer, so I am going to use the category. Then we'll create a product. Then we'll create user store admin. Then we are going to create orders table, and I want to store the cart of a user. So cart of a user in database also. So you can create application without storing the cart in database or by storing the cart in database. So I'll suggest you to store the cart in database. So that is very helpful if user adds some products in the cart and unfortunately not able to buy them, and he got some different important work, he left the cart. as it is, and if you do not store it in a table, so user need to again search the production identity card, because if you are not storing it in table, you need to store it in a session, and session will be vanished as soon as user log out or session timeout, or user switch the browser for 20 minutes, then session will be going to vanish. So it's better option to store the card data in a table. Now let's try to create the tables for this directly. So I'm going to open the SQL Server, and in the SQL Server, so I'll create all these tables. Okay, now it's open, so I'll connect it. At the first step, we'll create database. So I'll right click on the databases tab, and then we'll say add a database, new database. And here we'll put a name to database online store DB. Online store DB. Online store DB. Now in the online store DB, we'll expand this, we'll add the tables as we discussed. So I'm right clicking on the table tab, then we'll see new table. Here we'll see something called the main category. We'll say begin here. So throughout the application, so what are the primary keys are there? So I'm going to keep them as a begin. Now here we'll create a main category name, and I want this to be the ID. So for every primary key, I'm going to attach ID here. Now this to be the primary key, I'll right click here, I'll set the primary key. I'll go to the identity specification, we'll say S. So I'm making a primary key identity so that its value will be generated automatically here. Now I'll say something called main category table. Now in the main category table, we have this. Now I'll add a few more tables here. So I'll say something called category ID. We'll say begin here, and we'll say something called category name varchar. Now I'll set this as a primary key, and I'll set it identity to true. So I'll make it category table. Now I'll add a table. So it's product ID, we'll say begin, we'll say product name varchar, we'll say MFG name varchar, we'll say price decimal 18,2. Then we'll say description. I'll not suggest you to use the DESC. DESC is a built-in keyword. Fine. So I'll say product DESC. I'll say varchar max. Then we'll say something called product photo, or we'll say image varchar max. So I want to also store the product image here. So I'll make the product ID primary key. Then we'll say identity specification 2. Then we'll create a table. So which table we'll create here? We'll create a product table. So when we refresh this, we'll get these tables here. We'll add a few more tables. Store tables, so store ID, store name, varchar, store address, suppose varchar. You can put other information like email ID, mobile number, about the store, or other information like GST registration number or whatever information that you want. Fine. Now, if you have only one admin for your store, so you can add the admin fields in this table. But if you assume that multiple admins can be there, so in that case, we'll create a separate table for the admins. So I'll set this a primary key and I'll make it identity. And here also something called store table. Now I'll add one more table, store admin ID. Now we are creating a separate table for the store admin because I assume that there will be multiple admins and admin is going to log in inside a system and do the stuff for activity. Now store ID. So by the store ID we will tell the database that this admin belongs to the store. Then you can have the first name, last name, whatever fields that you want. So I'm keeping it simple. So it's the first name, last name, and we'll say something called mobile number, and so username or email ID. So we want to do the login using an email ID. So I'm getting the email ID and the password for the store. So I'm using varchar50 for the password, email ID varchar50. You can change their size as per your requirements. So I'm not going to store large email IDs or passwords. That's why I'm using varchar50. If you don't know, you can use the varchar max. Now I'll set the store admin ID as a primary key and we'll set the identity specification to true. Now I want to make the store ID as a foreign key. Now to make any store ID as a foreign key, so right click on the store ID, we'll say relationships, we'll say add. Now I'll go to this pretty box and here, so I repeat, so I'm clicking on the tables in the column specifications and here we'll select the primary key table, so store table that has a primary key, then we have the store ID and then we have the store ID here. Now click on the OK and then we'll say store admin table. So we'll say store admin table. Now we'll say save and we'll have the refresh and we have this. Now I'll add one more table and in the store admin, similar to store admin, I want a user table. So I'll say user ID, we'll say suppose first name, we can have the last name, we can have the address, and we can have the email ID. For address, I'm using varchar max. Contact number. Then we can have the password for the user. So because user is also going to log in inside the system, so we'll have the password field. I'll set the user ID as a primary key. Then we'll use the identity specification. We'll set true. Now I'll save this. Now I'll say something called user table. Now in the next step, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the order table. Now to create the order table, so we are going to create two tables, so order master or just the order table, user order table we can say, and user order detail table. So I'm going to create these two tables here because user order table and user order detail table. So user order table and user order detail table. Why with these two tables? Because user order will store the information of a user who had placed order, that will be user ID and order date and all this, and user order detail will store the products from that order. Now one order can have the multiple products. So for one order record, there will be multiple order detail records. So that's why. So I'm creating a separate tables here for the user order and user order detail. Now let's create this directly here in the SQL Server. So I'll right click on the tables, and here we'll say something called user order ID, begin, and we'll say order date, date time, and we'll say user ID, again the begin, and I want is paid. So I want this is paid will be true or false if the order is paid. So I want to make it true, and if order is not paid, so if it is on the cash on delivery or some kind of other arrangement, so I'll set it to false. And then to store true and false, we are going to use a data type beat. So SQL Server has a beat data type, and that can be used to store true and false here. So we'll say user order ID, I'll set it as primary key, and then we'll have the identity specification here, so that will be true. And I want this user ID to be the foreign key, so I'll right click on this user ID, I'll go to the relationships. Now I'll add a new relationship here, so we'll go to the tables and column specifications, and in tables and column specifications, so we'll say user table, then we'll say user ID, and then we have the user ID. Okay, now I'll click on the OK. Now I'll say close, and we'll put the name to this table, so user order table. Fine. Now refresh. By mistake I had made this B capital, so I'll make it small, TB. Oh, sorry. User order table. Now I'll create one more table here. So I'll say user order detail ID, will say begin, and user order ID, that will be again begin. So product ID, that you want to be the part of this order that we have. Price of that particular product, so we need to store the price again here, because product prices may going to change in the master table, so product table. And the quantity of orders, also something called integers. I'm assuming, so we are selling integer quantity type of products, not the we can say sugar, or we are going to sell, we are not going to sell them. So if your quantity is in decimal, so you can say decimal 18,2 or 20,2, whatever the size that you prefer, you can have. But I'm assuming the quantity is in the integers, I'll say integer. Now we'll have this primary key. Now here we'll say save, and we'll say user order ID need to be the foreign key, so I'll go to the relationship, we'll add the relationship here. And what we can do, so say select the user order table that contains the primary key here, then we have the user ID, and here user order ID. Now we want to add one more foreign key here, so product ID, so I'll say add again, and here we'll go to the product table. So product table is the primary key table here. We have the product ID, and then we have the product ID here, so both of the product IDs. Now so save, and here also something called product, sorry, user order detail, so user order detail table. Okay, now this is the minimum database that we need. Besides this, we need table for the cart, and we'll create the cart tables on the fly as we required. Okay, now in the next step, so what we do is we are going to start the Visual Studio, and we'll create MVC project. So I'll create new here. So in this list, we'll select for the AS.NET, but here we do not have that option, so I'll select here AS.NET, and here I'll select the AS.NET Web Application .NET Framework. So we are using a .NET Framework here, not the core, and this is C#, AS.NET Web Application .NET Framework. So I'll say next here. Now I'll say online store app, and I'll store it into a different folder. to create online store app. Create. Now we'll select the MVC application here, not the empty. So select MVC. So a project template for creating ASP.NET MVC applications. And here I will use the MVC, and I will remove this configure for HTTPS. Okay, so I'm using no authentication. Configure for HTTPS is removed and MVC. Now it's a create here. So slow. Okay. Now if you go to solution explorer, this is your MVC project structure, which will have the app start, contained, controllers, fonts, models, scripts. We use all these folders are there. Fine. Now, so at the first tab, what I'll do is I will add one area. So we'll create a separate areas for a user and a store. So I'll say add. So I'll right click on the project and we'll say add here. And we'll go to the new item. Oh, sorry, not in new item. To add the areas, we'll right click here. We'll say add, and we should get the area option here. Now, when you do not get the area option in this particular menu, so what we do, we'll create a folder with the name areas. And when we right click on the areas folder, we'll say add, we'll get the area option. And in this area options, so I'll put a name, suppose store. So we'll add the area for the store so that the controllers or views that belong to store will maintain it in the store area, and the controllers or views that we need, so we'll maintain them in a user area. So we'll say add and we'll say something called user. So we have created two areas here. Fine. User and store. So right now I'll go to the store area, controllers, we'll add one controller and we'll put some name to this controller. So MVC5 controller empty, and we'll make it store home. Suppose store home controller. Okay. Now in the store home, so right click here, we'll say add view, and we'll add the index view here. Okay. And I want to use the layout for the index, so I'll say add here. Okay. And here instead of index heading, we'll say welcome to store. Now, so what we can do is, so if you look at here, so it had automatically added a layout as well as view start. Now in the second step, so we want to create a login activity for the store. So what is my practice? So my practice is I always create login controllers, either it is for the store or user or anybody, in the root controller folder. Login, logout, registration, at least the three activities in a root controller. So to create that, we'll right click on this root controller folder, we'll go to the controller here, we'll say MVC5 empty controller, and we'll say manage stores. Manage stores here. Now the first activity that I want to do here is something called do login. So if anybody call a manage stores controller do login, so I want to show a login form to a store. Okay. Now, so to start implementing the login activity of store, we need a model, and to create a model, we will right click on a project, will say add new item. Now in add new item, so we'll go to the entity here, We'll say AD.NET entity. So I'll put some name to this file, something called store model. You can put any name as per your requirement. Now in the next step we have the wizard, and in this wizard, so it's EF designer from database, and we'll say new connection here, and we'll put the server name, and we'll select the database name here. So we'll select the database name, online store DB, text connection. We did it several times in MVC session. Also next here, EF6.x. Now select all the tables. I want to add all tables. I'll select all tables and we'll say finish. Now it will have this EDMX file. So it will create the EDMX file for you. It's taking time. So I'll just save this and close this. Now to implement the login activity, I want to create a view model. So for login registrations, it's always a good programming practice to create a view model. So to maintain the view models, I am creating a separate folder, view models, and I will put all the view models in this view models folder, and we'll add a view model for the login. So what we want in for the login, we'll put the name login VM, and login VM. So I want to do the login using the email ID. So it will have the two properties, email ID, and then it will have one more property, password. Now we'll use the data annotation to do the validation. So we'll say required, and we'll say error message, email ID required, password we'll say required, we'll say error message, password required. And to validate that this is a valid email ID, so we'll use attribute something called email ID, and this email only, and then email address. Let me check. So email address, the error message will say invalid email ID, and I want to change the data type of the password. So I want to put data type attribute here with the password. Right. Now this login VM is ready for the login. Now so what we do, so do the login. So for the login you go to the controller, manage store controller, do login. I will decorate it using HTTP get, and I'll keep this D capital. So from this we'll just add a view and we'll submit it back to HTTP post, and here also do login, and here also you login VM. Correct. Now right click here, we'll say add view. Now so I'm not using a layout for this. So I'm not using a layout for this login, so I'm creating a separate view without layout. Now here we'll design a login screen. So for right now I'm just keeping it very simple. We'll say something called store login, and the store login, suppose if I use a div, and here it's a div, and in this div, suppose if I say label, I'll say email ID, and if I say, so I will make a strongly type that will be connected to, so online store app dot view models dot login VM. Now here what we use, so we use HTML dot editor file, and editor file is p implies p dot email id, and if you want here we can have the html dot label file. So p implies p dot email id. Now I'll create one more div, also something called html dot label file, p implies p dot password, and here I'll set that html dot editor file, also p implies p dot password, and we'll add it into form. So I'll put this div inside a form, and for the form we need to use here using html dot begin form. Now here we'll paste this form, and at the end we need to add a submit button. So I'll say div, and we'll say input type equal to submit, value equal to save. Sorry, we'll say something called login, and here also I want to put one anchor tag using this. So I'll say html dot action link. So this is something called sign up. Oh sorry, first of all we are not going to provide the sign up, so we do not need it. Now so when you hit the submit button, so where this form will be submitted, so this will be submitted to HTTP, we can say post version of a do login. Now I want to display the validation message here in a new div, so I'll say html dot. Later on we are going to change this UI. I am just keeping this simple right now, so I'll say something called email ID, and here we'll say something called div and that html dot validation message for will say p implies p dot password, and we also create a validation summary. So say div and that html dot validation summary, and we'll pass through here. And to make the client side validation work, so what we need to do, so we need to use the jQuery UI. So for that I'll go to the script. jQuery is built in here, so you do not need to do any installation. It's available directly here. Now then we have the jQuery dot validate dot min.js, and we need jQuery dot validate dot min dot unextensive dot min.js. And for jQuery also, so if you want deployment version, so it's min.js here. Development version, you can use the plain jQuery. Now this is for validation. Beside this, I want to use the Bootstrap. So where I'll go, so I'll go to the we can say content. In a content, you'll find the bootstrap.css. So Bootstrap is also built in here. You just need to drag and drop it, and you need to drag and drop one more file, bootstrap.js, and it's the CSS file should be at the top. So first CSS and then all the right. Now here is something called class text center. So I want to send everything in the center. So tag slash center, and I want a well around it. Okay, and we want here a class color danger, and here also we want a class color danger. Okay, now on the submit button, so I want a class btn dash suppose success. Now this UI is ready. So when you submit this form, so where this form will go, so it will take you to the manage stores controller, this action. Now in this action we'll do the server side validation again. So model state dot is valid, and here also what we can do, we'll check for the user. So where rec equal to, so we need to create object of entities, so it's entities, and also entity. So it's entity dot user tables from store tables. store admin table dot singular default. So p plus p dot email id equal to rec dot email id. Oh, sorry. So we'll make it ad rec. So rec dot email id here, and p dot password equal to rec dot password. Okay. So if we found a record here, so it's if ad rec not equal to null. So if ADREC is not equal to null, then we'll create one session variable. Session is directly accessible here. So we'll say admin ID. So if you want to store the admin ID here, we'll say ADREC dot store admin ID. So we are going to use the session later on. Also redirect to action. So which action? We'll divert it to the index action of store home controller and area. So which area? So area is store. So here we are diverting to the index action of store home controller in the area store. So store is area, store home is controller, and index is action. If this is not the case, then we'll say something called modal state dot add modal error, and here we'll say invalid email ID or password, and we'll go back to view and we'll carry this right here. Right. Now let's test this whether this is working or not. So this is the by default UI. So where we want to go? So we want to go to the manage stores, do login. So you get this login screen here. Okay. So we'll make this UI a little bit proper. So I had by mistake applied the alert class here. We'll apply it here. Okay. Now here also style and also vertical. So we'll say margin dash top. We'll have suppose 300, and we'll have to supply the class well here. We'll save this and we'll go to this and let us check. Okay. Now we'll make it 200. Okay. There's one more thing that we'll do. We'll put all these form divs inside one div, and in this div we apply the class well. So here we'll apply this and we'll say style and we'll say width here and we'll support 380. Okay. You cut this and we'll paste it here. I'll cut this and I'll paste it here. Okay. Okay, we'll fix it later on also because we are going to use the bootstrap to arrange it. So some margin dash left and we'll say something called 200 pixel. Okay. Now suppose this is the store login, so where we need to put the email ID and password. If I click on the login, so it will say email ID, invalid email ID or password, and the password required, email ID required. So if I put the email ID, proper email ID, and if I put the password, so it will go to this particular action. Let me put the breakpoint here. And if I say this, so where it will go? So it will go to here and it will check whether the user is logged in or not. So it will try to find the user using that user ID and password. If user found, it will set the session name this, and if not found, it will say invalid email ID or password. So it's saying invalid email ID password because there is no, we can say user right now in database. So I'll go to SQL Server and I'll create one store by hard coding the data inside a table because we are not going to offer a registration for the store. So we'll create the store directly here. So I'll say something called a QD and we'll say contact at writepune.com and we'll say mobile number. And here we'll say store admin. So say store ID 1, then we'll say suppose admin mobile number. So mobile number. Email ID so admin at suppose gmail.com, and for time being I'm putting the password admin. Now if I put admin at gmail.com and a password admin, if I say login, now here it will get that user in database. Now still it's not getting that user in database. Let me check. There is a spelling mistake here in the Gmail, and we'll say login now. And here we'll have this. Now it will find that user and it's expected to divert you to a store home index action. So in the store home index action, so we are having welcome to store. So we have put it this message welcome to store, and where from this gets, so this will be available here from layout. Right. Now today we are going to stop itself, and tomorrow we'll continue with this again, and we'll try to configure the template and perform the store activities.